Hello everybody and welcome back to yet another episode of Planeswalking with the Professors. Today we finally take a break from trying to break the metagames by ourselves and see how everyone else tried to with the first Star City Games 5k of 2009. From the continued resilience of Faeries to expected Boat Brew Decks and more. And hey, have you seen the recent core set changes to Magic in 2009? Or 2010? So we'll be checking that out as well. So let's draw. So the Star City 5k results are up, and to the hundreds that contradicted this statement, yes, Faeries is not dead, as I said, but yes, Faeries is not 1/3 of the metagame or even 1/5 of the metagame, as I said. Sure, we're just looking at the top 16, but as we can see, these are really the only decks that matter, as it would appear they're showing all the decks you really need to care about when sideboarding, and in most cases have cards that apply to defense against particular archetypes and not so much specific decks. And while it would appear Bitter Blossom was still in 1/4 of the decks of the top 16, it would also appear that Faeries has had a response with 14 copies of Banefire and 13 of Volcanic Fallout making a showing, and that, well, in most cases of Rock, Paper, Scissors Magic, where Faeries has been Rock, decks with Banefire and Volcanic Fallout Paper, there is no correctly defined Scissors. And in such a case, we have a format indefinitely better than one we've had in a long time. So let's start by breaking all these new and morphed decks out. Okay, so Faeries, thank God, wouldn't appear to have gotten anything, and have just gotten changed up with some simple numbers of main boarding Terror over Agony Warp. However, after that, everything gets oh so much more interesting. Delving into the slight changes of 5-color control, we see Plume Veil, Courier's Capsule, and Banefire making it into the main board, as well as Volcanic Fallout taking the place of Fire Spout, but what's that thing? Obelisk of Alara. I mean, sure, it's just a one of and one deck that made one top 16 in one Conflict Standard tournament, but come on, the sheer possibilities of this card were just epic. I was at the pre-release with this card, and sure, in Standard it's infinitely more likely that they'll counter it, or destroy it, or just burn you than when you're tapped out, but the mind tricks of the card being able to get you out of Death's Reach from a Flame Javelin, make your Muldrifter strong enough to kill a Demigod of Revenge, burn at end of turn, or even loot is just an insane head game that 5-color control players just gotta love. And yes, that is a one of Exotic Orchard. All hail the epic deck builder, Bradley Shepard. But climbing up the ladder of mutations, we see Blightning Aggro, and yeah, I know one of these had 3 copies of Bitter Blossom, but then again, it also placed the lowest of any Blightning Aggro deck in the top 16. So let's check out the 6th place finish by Ken Adams. This list looks pretty similar from what we saw last season, with one particularly surprising exception being that the deck no longer tries to build up mana for Demigod of Revenge, now moved to the sideboard, but rather get in there with fast Hellspark Elemental, the ridiculous 6 damage for 1 spell and 4 mana card, and is that Goblin Outlander? Well, I mean, after all, white is the best color in the format. Wait a minute, you mean white's actually making a showing in 9 out of the top 16 decks? Speaking of one, here's the highly expected Boat Brew deck that runs much like the red-white Painter Servant combo deck works, but without the stupid combos, with more beats, 4-for-1s, and just overall ridiculous card advantage. But aside from a little bit of what we've seen last season, we also see something blossoming bitterly, with so many decks that most of the time just look like that couldn't fill slots with the cards they meant to, and in many cases did last season, and are instead resorting to what we would instead know as the ridiculous jank. Remember that green-white Little Kid deck? The aggro one with the Wiltleaf Lieges and Kitchen Finks? Well, we see something even more awesomely ridiculous in the form of green-white control. I mean, sure, it runs the anticipated Marshall Ku's Path to Exile, Kitchen Finks, and Spectral Processions, but Steward of Valoron, 1 of boarded Wall of Reverence, 2 boarded Michaeloth? Awesome. Of course, I'm not sure how far this deck will go, being the continuing dominance of ridiculously fast aggro decks that can just sweep the early game and Cruel Ultimatum late. And finally, on our way up the ladder, we see one of the 5 rebreaks, as they're being called, being the 5 cards from Lorwyn block Wizards apologized for. The first is Cryptic Command. It was clear that Wizards had no intention of goofing a card like this, and at casting cost of 1 UUU, it shouldn't have been goofed, and not because of the singularity of the Vivids, or singularity of the Reflecting Bulls that broke it, but because of the absurd combination and some assistance from Sunken Ruins. The second card I'll mention was Bitter Blossom. I think we know that one's kinda obvious. I mean, it just is a card advantage machine, and as Mike Turian said, Scattershot Archer and Volcanic Fallout had to be made for the sole purpose of hating on Bitter Blossom. Third was a card that screwed this tribe up flavorfully, Mistbind Click. Because, it makes total sense to have little innocent fairies now on steroids with an incredible strong defense that can just appear out of nowhere. Fourth was the Vivids, but more so the interaction between the Vivids and Reflecting Pool. It has now been thought that they should have come into play with one counter, or said something like, if you control 2 Vivids, sacrifice 1. And finally, as I think we all know, was Revelark. The interaction of this card is just stupid. It's like when you're playing against a telepathy, okay, maybe my opponents are the only ones that will ever be doing this, and they know your every move before you make it and can deny you anything that you're going to cast. But because of this incredible missed card, we see the Star City Games 5k winning deck, Esperlark. We were expecting a deck like this for a while, but I'm particularly surprised about the fact that this deck doesn't run Siege Gang Commander. But I understand the mana base is stretching far enough and would like to consistently cast a 3rd turn Esper Tribe. The particularly interesting tech in this deck is not the expected Path to Exile, sideboarded 1-ofs, or Still Moon Cavaliers, of which I don't believe I've ever seen 4 of, but of the Glenorlandra Archmages. One of the only issues with Revelark is the dreaded countering case, and often a good Faeries player will figure out that they just need to wait and counter the Revelarks, and then they win. However, with Glenorlandra Archmage, which is not only a quadruple use card with Revelark, but it importantly has the ability to get Revelark out, and even in the later game with 10 mana open, win out the Counterspell War as a 2-for-1. And okay, sure we didn't see something as techy as some uber 5-color domain deck, but remember, Kyoto awaits in the land of the rising sun in this great world of standard Magic. 2 months ago at Worlds, Aaron Forsyth explained in his interview that the game was, quote, going strong, and while tough things in the gaming industry were happening left and right, Magic was raring to go. Ever since the introduction of Mythic Rares, reduction of set size, and cutting of a Pro Tour, I tried to believe this, and while this seems like Wizards' most recent attempt to make money, I do think this idea more than makes up for this idea of cutting cards into sets. This year may become bigger than the 6th edition rules change. Mythics that scared everyone stiff, a Pro Tour cut with the economic collapse put everyone at a standstill, and the set changes at first glance may just have everyone putrefied. But as I did with Mythic Rares and Lands and Packs in my review of 2008, I argue that these changes are actually good. Is it Wizards trying to make money? Yes. However, is it Wizards just trying to make money? No. The first change that we'll be taking a look at is the simple fact that Magic is taking a page from the Auto Producer Manual and naming the core set after the year after the set comes out instead of the year it comes out. Why? Well, I and Aaron Forsyth do agree in saying that it keeps the set fresh and new, and core sets will be from, quote, this current year, and does allow newer players to get that just because we were on the 10th edition doesn't mean you have to go back and get 9 editions, which is, to be fair, less self-explanatory than thinking someone has to get the last 2009 years of core sets. Second, and more importantly, is the incorporation of newer cards in the set. Being that the number of, quote, new cards has been cut down this year to 519 instead of the previous 286/165/180 blocks with 631 new cards, by adding an additional 145 or so to actually raise the number of new cards per year to 664. And while the core set is of course smaller, what has really mattered more so to older players is getting new cards. However, questions do arise from this as to how complicated cards in a core set can really be, and if the vanilla constructed junk will be emptied into the core sets over expert level ones. Third is the importance of that the core set will come out every year. This is the ingenious idea R&D should have come up with years ago, as in many shops, my own often included, core set packs will not always be available and do appear to vanish when put with between 4 and 7 estranged sets on the shelf of a hobby store compared to 3, or a bigger retailer where customer assistance on Magic most likely isn't available. And just as some final notes on the set is that there will be a 3-month period where 2 are playable in Standard, which seems fine and keeps the number of legal sets between 5 and 8, as it was before. Second is that a whole kind of dual land will be coming out in Magic 2010, meaning get your wallets ready, and 15 Mythic Rares will be in the set, meaning, again, get your wallets ready for the 6 new ones. And finally are the facts that Black Knight will be returning, gotta love the color hate, as will the 5 Lore 1 Planeswalkers at Mythic Rarity, and Sarah Angel as an uncommon, and Birds of Paradise, of which peculiarly have no reminder text for their flying keywords. However, 3 totally new cards you can expect to see this summer are Capricious Efreet, Wall of Frost, and Silence. These cards seem to fit in with the whole core set-esque cards, as their setting and races are generic, with abilities simple enough for newer players to understand at first, with hidden enough interactions and rules for newer players to learn. This card will undoubtedly make it into standard control main decks and sideboards, extended combo decks, and possibly creep even further into vintage. The card's design is fantastic. It stops green and black from aggroing, but allows blue as an ally color to trigger some spells and still has that restrictive feel many white cards needed. The only thing that worries me is the logo. I mean, yes, I realize that the people designing this set now will most likely be dead unless our cybernetic selves come in the mail early for the next 100 years, but how do they plan to continue a logo like that 100 years from now? Well, that's enough stupid questions for this week. So until next time, this is Anthony Palmario tapped out for now, but we'll be back soon.